I thought our second anniversary party was a celebration of my marriage. I was wrong. It was my public execution. My husband and his family gathered our friends and colleagues not to honor me, but to humiliate me, to discard me for failing to get pregnant. What they didn't count on was that my body had a secret of its own, and the justice they were about to receive would be devastatingly poetic. This is the story of how I survived their ultimate betrayal. If you believe that true justice always finds a way, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. The rich, sweet scent of blueberry pancakes should have been the official fragrance of our second anniversary. I had envisioned it as the opening act of a perfect day, a fragrant promise of celebration. I'd crept out of bed before the sun had even thought about rising, moving through the quiet house with a heart that fluttered like a trapped bird, a mix of nervous hope and a desperate need to make things right. Everything had to be perfect. Perfection, I reasoned, was a kind of armor. Maybe if the day was flawless, it could shield us from the cracks that had begun to spiderweb across the foundation of our marriage. I squeezed a pile of oranges by hand, the tangy spray misting the air, just the way Michael always said he loved. I brewed his favorite dark roast coffee, the expensive kind we only bought for special occasions, and fried the thick-cut bacon until it was perfectly crisp. Each action was deliberate, a prayer in motion. I arranged it all on our best wooden tray, the one we'd received as a wedding gift, and added a single white rose in a small bud vase. A peace offering, a reminder. Happy anniversary, honey, I whispered, my voice barely disturbing the quiet of the bedroom. I placed the tray gently on the nightstand beside him. Michael stirred, a low groan rumbling in his chest. He blinked his eyes open, and for a fleeting second, I saw the man I married. But then a veil dropped. His gaze slid over the meticulously arranged tray, lingered for a moment on the rose, and then landed on me. There was no spark of joy, no warmth, not even a flicker of recognition for the effort. Just a flat, tired emptiness that seemed to swallow the morning light. Yeah, 2 years, he mumbled, as if on autopilot. His hand reached not for the coffee or the fork, but for the cold glass and metal of his phone. The screen lit up, casting a pale, clinical glow on his face. His thumb began its familiar, rhythmic dance scroll. Pause. Scroll. The pancakes, still steaming, were ignored. The rich aroma of the coffee turned bitter in the air, mingling with the silence he so effortlessly created. He had built a wall around himself, and he was holding the blueprint. A memory, so vivid it felt like a dream, ambushed me. I was standing under a sprawling oak tree, its branches heavy with white roses, the scent of summer all around us. Michael was looking at me then, his eyes shining with a fierce, protective light that made me feel like the only person in the world. I will always protect you, Nicole, he had vowed, his voice thick with an emotion I thought was unbreakable. It's you and me against the world. Later, at the reception, he had dabbed a tiny smudge of buttercream from my nose with his thumb, his laughter warm and genuine against my ear. My perfect wife, he'd whispered. Now, that same man sat inches away from me, yet he was a million miles distant. The world he'd promised to shield me from felt like it was right here in our bedroom, an invisible, crushing weight, and I was the only one suffocating. This suffocating chill hadn't appeared overnight. It had been a gradual frost, creeping in at the edges for weeks, so subtle at first that I could pretend it was just my imagination. The first tangible sign had arrived 3 weeks ago, disguised as junk mail, While sorting a pile of envelopes, I found a credit card statement. My eyes scanned the familiar list of charges, groceries, gas, our Netflix subscription, and then stopped. A charge for over $150 at a restaurant called the Gilded Sparrow. It was a new, ridiculously expensive place downtown. The kind of place you go to impress someone, a place we had never been together. When I brought it up that evening, I tried to keep my tone light. Casual. Did you take a client to that new place? The Gilded Sparrow must have been important. He barely looked up from his laptop. Yeah. It was a client lunch. A real bore. Actually, you know how it is. He was so dismissive, so nonchalant, that I felt foolish for even asking. I wanted to believe him, so I tucked my doubt away. But doubt has a way of festering. A week later, the detailed phone bill arrived. I wasn't snooping, it was just there. Part of our monthly communications bundle. The summary page was what caught my eye, a shocking number of texts and calls, all directed to a single number I didn't recognize. My blood ran cold as I scanned the timestamps. 117A. M. 242A. M. 305A. M. These were the nights he'd rolled over and mumbled something about an early start before retreating to the guest room. The nights he claimed he was on late conference calls with the international team. A sickening realization washed over me. This wasn't a client. This wasn't work. This was a secret. That night, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited until he was settled on the couch, watching some mindless action movie. I held the bill in my hands. The paper felt flimsy, insignificant. Yet it held the power to detonate our lives. Michael, I began, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. Who is this number? There are hundreds of messages, calls at all hours of the night. He looked at the paper, then at me, and his expression shifted instantly from boredom to a cold, hard fury. He snatched the bill from my hand. Are you serious right now? You're actually going through my phone records like some kind of private detective. It was on the summary page. Michael, I wasn't. I cannot believe this. He interrupted, his voice rising. He stood up, the motion aggressive, making me flinch. This is exactly what I'm talking about. I work my tail off for us. For this life? And I come home to an interrogation. You're so insecure. So paranoid. You're suffocating me, he threw his hands up in exasperation. Why can't you just trust me, this right here? This is the problem with our marriage. Nicole, your insecurity is the problem. His words were a masterclass in deflection, twisting my valid concern into a personal failing. He made me feel small, irrational, crazy. He stormed out of the room, slamming the door to our home office behind him, leaving me alone in the sudden, ringing silence. I sank onto the couch, my body trembling, the phone bill lying on the floor like an accusation. In a moment of pure desperation the next day, I called his mother. I had this naive hope that Karen, who always greeted me with hugs and called me sweetheart, could be an ally, a bridge to her son. I carefully explained that Michael seemed withdrawn and that I was worried. Her voice on the other end of the line was a thick, syrupy performance of sympathy. Oh, you poor thing, she cooed. It must be so incredibly difficult for you. There was a beat of silence, calculated and cold. But you know, Nicole, men are simple creatures. They have needs. And if their home life isn't, well, fulfilling, Sometimes they'll naturally look for comfort and warmth elsewhere. The implication hung in the air. Heavy and poisonous. Comfort. What do you mean by that? Karen. Well, dear, she said, the sweetness in her tone curdling into something sharp and judgmental. A family is meant to grow. It's built on the promise of children, of a legacy. When that promise isn't fulfilled, it can put a terrible, unspoken strain on a man. It makes a house feel less like a home, and there it was. The true source of her judgment, laid bare. In her eyes, I was a barren field, a failed investment. I hung up the phone, a hollow sickness churning in my gut. The only person I could turn to, the only person who saw me and not just my function as a wife, was Jessica. He said that you're the problem. Jess's voice was a thunderclap of righteous anger over the phone. That manipulative, gaslighting son of a... I don't know what to do anymore. Jess, I whispered. The tears I'd been holding back finally breaking free. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And on top of it all, I just feel physically awful. I'm exhausted all the time. And I feel nauseous every morning. I'm sure the stress is just eating me alive. Okay. First of all, breathe, Jess commanded, her voice softening into the familiar, comforting tone that had seen me through every crisis since college. You need to take care of yourself. Nick, to hell with him for a minute. To hell with his creepy, passive-aggressive mother. What do you need right now? Her unwavering loyalty was the one solid piece of ground in my earthquake of a life. But a stubborn, foolish part of me wasn't ready to give up. It clung to the idea that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. I decided to channel all my fear and pain into a single, desperate act of hope. The anniversary party. It was scheduled for that weekend at his parents' house. I became obsessed with the idea that if I could create a perfect evening, a dazzling display of my love and commitment, it would act like a defibrillator on our dying marriage. It would shock Michael's heart back into remembering the man he used to be. So I threw myself into the preparations. I arrived at his parents' sprawling suburban home that afternoon and set to work transforming their sterile, formal dining room. I arranged huge bouquets of my favorite flowers, fragrant white lilies, on the mantel and the buffet table. I spent an hour polishing their antique silverware until my reflection stared back at me, distorted and strange. I set 20 places at the long mahogany table with their best china, the plates trimmed with gold, making sure every fork and knife was perfectly aligned. I wanted the room to feel enchanted, to radiate a warmth that could melt the ice in Michael's heart. Karen fluttered around me, her excitement feeling increasingly forced and brittle. Oh, it's just breathtaking. Dear, you have such a wonderful touch. Tonight is going to be so special. I can just feel it. Truly a life-changing night. The way she emphasized life-changing sent a shiver down my spine. Robert, my father-in-law, was even more unsettling. He stood in the doorway for a long time, silently watching me light the tapered candles, a glass of dark amber scotch swirling in his hand. He had the quiet, unnerving stillness of a predator. You know, he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that commanded attention. 2 years is a good test. It's long enough to really evaluate the durability of anything. A car. A business partnership. He paused, taking a long, slow sip. His cold blue eyes locked on mine over the rim of the glass. A marriage. It wasn't an observation. It was a threat. I tried to ignore the icy dread coiling in my stomach, focusing on the simple, physical task of lighting the last candle. The guests would be arriving soon. Michael was supposed to be here by now. My throat felt tight and dry, so I slipped into the vast arcole.n silent kitchen to get a glass of water. The swinging door that connected it to the dining room didn't click shut behind me, leaving a small gap. As I stood by the sink, I heard their voices, Robert and Karen, talking in hushed, urgent tones. I went completely still, pressing myself against the cool marble countertop, every nerve ending tingling. "She'll never suspect a thing," Karen was whispering, her voice laced with a cruel, triumphant glee. "It's all been perfectly arranged. He knows what he has to do." Then I heard Robert's voice, as sharp and cold as shattered glass. "Good. Brittany is ready. It's time. Tonight, we finally solve this problem for good." Brittany. The name echoed in the sudden, roaring silence in my head. I didn't know who she was, but I knew, with a terrifying, soul-crushing certainty, what she was: a solution, a replacement. My problem was about to be solved. The glass of water slipped from my nerveless fingers and shattered on the pristine tile floor. The sound as loud and final as a gunshot. I wasn't the hostess of this celebration. I was the sacrifice. For a frozen second, the only sound in the universe was the sharp, crystalline tinkle of shattering glass against the cold tile. My heart seemed to shatter with it. A deafening explosion in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen. I stared down at the glittering fragments, a miniature galaxy of ruin at my feet, and my breath hitched in my throat. The swinging door flew open, and Karen stood there, her perfectly made-up face a mask of annoyance barely concealed by a veneer of concern. "Nicole, good heavens. Are you all right?" Her eyes weren't on me, they were on the mess. "I'm fine," I stammered, my voice sounding thin and foreign. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I began to pick up the larger shards. It just slipped. I'm so clumsy. The lie felt like sawdust in my mouth. "Well, for goodness sake, leave it. The help can get it," she said dismissively, already turning back toward the dining room. "Michael just arrived. Do try to pull yourself together. Dear, the guests are starting to trickle in." Her words were a cold splash of water, snapping me out of my paralysis. Michael was here, in the house, the man whose betrayal was now a certainty. A living, breathing thing named Brittany. I left the broken glass on the floor, a small, glittering memorial to my broken marriage, and walked out of the kitchen on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. I found him near the entryway, shrugging off his coat while chatting with one of his father's business partners. He looked handsome, relaxed, completely at ease. He hadn't even looked for me. A wave of nausea, sharp and acidic, rose in my throat. I waited until his conversation ended. Then I stepped in front of him, keeping my voice low and steady. "Michael, we need to talk." He sighed, a long-suffering sound. "Nick, can it wait? We have guests." "No, it can't," I said, my voice gaining a hard edge. I pulled him by the elbow into a small, empty study off the main hall. I closed the door behind us. "I overheard your parents. In the kitchen." His face hardened. "What? Were you eavesdropping now? What is wrong with you tonight?" "They mentioned a name." I pushed on, ignoring his attack. "Brittany. They said she was ready. That tonight you would solve the problem." Who is Brittany? Michael. He had the audacity to look offended. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and let out a short, humorless laugh. Brittany, she's a junior associate from the firm. Dad's taken her under his wing. Thinks she's a real go-getter. He invited her tonight to network. Is that what this is about? You're jealous of a 25-year-old kid? He was so good at it. This performance of outraged innocence. For a horrifying moment, I almost believed him. I almost believed I was the crazy, paranoid wife he was making me out to be. So you're telling me, I said, my voice barely a whisper, that there's nothing else going on. That's exactly what I'm telling you, he said, his tone softening into one of patronizing pity. Look, I know you've been under a lot of stress, but you cannot do this tonight. You're going to make a scene. My parents are watching. My colleagues are here. Just be normal. For a few hours. Can you do that for me? He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked out of the study, leaving me alone with his lies echoing in the silent room. I felt a desperate, primal need to escape. I walked back into the bustling living room, the cheerful chatter and clinking glasses feeling like a physical assault. I found Karen and forced a tight, brittle smile. I'm so sorry. I completely forgot to pick up the extra votive candles for the tables. I'll be right back. It's just a 10-minute trip to the store. Before she could protest, I grabbed my purse and keys and practically fled the house. I didn't drive to the store. I just drove. Aimlessly. My knuckles white on the steering wheel. I ended up in the parking lot of a small strip mall a few miles away. I needed coffee. I needed a moment to breathe. To think. I walked toward the entrance of a generic coffee shop. The Daily Grind. And that's when I saw them. Through the large plate glass window, seated at a small table in the corner, were Michael and a young woman. Her hair was a cascade of shiny, blonde curls, and she was laughing. Her head tilted back in a way that was both effortless and captivating. It was Michael, my husband, who was supposed to be at our anniversary party. He was leaning forward, a genuine, unguarded smile on his face. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in months. As I watched, frozen on the sidewalk, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. The world tilted on its axis. Every sound, every sensation, faded into a dull, distant roar. The coffee shop, the cars in the parking lot, the innocent chatter of people walking by, it all became a blurry, meaningless backdrop to the scene framed in the window. That was her. That had to be Brittany. My body moved before my mind did. My hand, trembling violently, reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I fumbled with the camera app, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I raised the phone, my breath catching in my chest. I centered them in the frame, my smiling husband, his hand covering hers. The image was perfectly clear. A high-definition photograph of my entire world falling apart. The click of the camera shutter sounded deafeningly loud in my ears, like a gunshot that had just ended a life. My life. I took the picture, lowered the phone, and stumbled back to my car. The image burned onto my retinas. I collapsed into the driver's seat, the leather cold against my skin. The carefully constructed dam inside me broke, and a tidal wave of grief and rage washed over me. Sobs tore through my body. Raw and ragged sounds of pure agony. I clutched the steering wheel, my forehead pressed against it. And I wept. I wept for the man I thought I'd married, for the future I thought we'd have, for the fool I had been. Me fingers, slick with tears. Finally managed to dial the only number that made sense. It rang twice before she picked up. Hey, did you get the candles? Jess's cheerful voice was a knife in my heart. He lied. I choked out, the words mangled by my sobs. Jess. He lied. I saw them. I saw them together. The cheerfulness in her voice vanished, replaced by a cold, hard fury. What? What are you talking about? Where are you? Between ragged breaths, I told her everything. The coffee shop. The girl. The way he smiled at her. The way he touched her. I took a picture. I whispered. The confession feeling shameful. I took a picture of them. Good, Jess said, her voice fierce and protective. Good for you. Now listen to me. Nicole, do not go back there. Do you hear me? Drive to my apartment? Right now. You are not spending one more second in that house with those monsters. Her words were a lifeline, a safe harbor in the storm. But as the initial wave of grief receded, it left behind something else. A cold, hard stone of resolve was forming in my gut. No, I said, my voice hoarse but clear. I have to go back. What, Nick? No. Why would you put yourself through that? Because I need to see his face, I said, the words tasting like metal. I need to look him in the eye while he lies to me. Knowing what I know, I can't let them win. Not like this. I won't just disappear. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Okay, Jess said slowly. Okay. I get it. But you promised me something first. Anything. You told me you've been feeling sick. Exhausted. All this stress. It's not good for you. Nick. There's an urgent care clinic 2 blocks from where you are. I just looked it up. Go there. Now. Get yourself checked out. For me? Please. You need to make sure you're physically okay before you walk back into that lion's den. Her logic cut through my emotional haze. She was right. I felt drained. Hollowed out. A part of me just wanted to curl up and sleep for 1,000 years. Okay. Jess. I whispered. Okay. I'll go. The urgent care clinic was sterile and impersonal. The air smelling of antiseptic and quiet despair. I checked in, my voice a monotone, and sat in the waiting room. Staring blankly at a daytime talk show playing on a muted television, I felt disconnected from my own body, like I was watching a movie about some other sad, pathetic woman. The doctor, a kind but busy woman, listened patiently as I described my symptoms, the exhaustion, the persistent nausea, the stress. It certainly sounds like you're under extreme duress, she said, making notes on a chart. I'd like to run a full blood panel. Check your iron levels, thyroid, vitamins, just to be safe and rule anything out. I agreed numbly. It was just another procedure. Another box to check. A nurse drew my blood with practiced efficiency. Her touch gentle. She told me the results would be emailed to me by the next morning. I thanked her and walked out into the late afternoon gloom, feeling even emptier than before. I didn't go back to the party. I drove home. To the house that no longer felt like mine. It was empty. A note from Michael was on the kitchen counter. Had to stay and help my parents clean up. We'll be late. Another lie. He wasn't with his parents. He was with her. I walked through the silent rooms, my footsteps echoing. I ended up in our bedroom. standing before the large, framed photograph from our wedding day that sat on our dresser. There we were. Two happy, hopeful people, smiling without a hint of the darkness to come. The woman in that picture believed in forvers. She believed in promises. She had no idea she was smiling at the man who would so casually and cruelly shatter her heart. I stared at her, a stranger from another lifetime, until my eyes blurred with fresh tears. The next morning, I woke up with a dull headache and a hollow ache in my chest. I made coffee. The routine a small, comfortless anchor in the chaos. Then my phone buzzed with an email notification. The subject line was clinical. Impersonal, your test results are available. My heart started to pound. A slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. I was expecting to see a diagnosis of anemia, a vitamin D deficiency, some physical manifestation of my emotional ruin. I opened the email and logged into the patient portal. I clicked on the results link, my eyes scanning the page of medical jargon and numbers. And then I saw it. A line item near the bottom. A hormone I vaguely recognized from biology class. Human chorionic gonadotropin. Next to it, a number. And next to the number, in bold, clinical text positive. I read it once, twice, a third time. The words refused to make sense. Positive. It was a mistake. It had to be a mistake. We hadn't been trying. In fact, we had barely touched each other in months. But the numbers didn't lie. Doctors didn't make mistakes like this. A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. I was pregnant. After all the pointed comments from Karen, all the disappointed looks from Robert, all the silent pressure from Michael, I was pregnant. The irony was so bitter, so profoundly cruel, that a laugh bubbled up in my throat, a sound that was half sob, half insanity. The despair and grief that had been my constant companions for the past 24 hours didn't disappear. Instead, they coalesced, crystallizing into something new, something cold, sharp, and diamond hard. The fog of my pain began to clear, and in its place was a chilling, absolute clarity. I picked up my phone. My hand was perfectly steady. I dialed Jessica. "Did you sleep?" was the first thing she asked. Her voice thick with worry. "Jess?" I said, my own voice calm, measured, and utterly devoid of the tears from the day before. "I got the results from the clinic," I told her. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "Oh my God." She finally breathed. "Nicole." "Oh my God. What are you going to do?" A plan, fully formed and terrifyingly simple, had already bloomed in my mind. "I need you to do something for me," I said. "A huge favor. I need you to go to a print shop. I'm forwarding you the email from the clinic. I need you to print out that results page. In color. Put it in a nice, thick envelope. A business envelope. And I need you to bring it to the anniversary party tonight." "Tonight, Nick?" "The party was last night." "No." I corrected her. "The humiliation was last night. The real party is tonight. His parents are hosting a day after brunch for some of the more important guests who stayed in town. I was just reminded by a calendar alert. And I am going to attend." Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, I'll be there." "What time?" "Be there at 1 o'clock sharp," I said. "And Jess, don't be late." After I hung up, I walked into my closet. I pushed past the sensible, comfortable clothes of my everyday life and reached for the back. There it was. The dress I'd bought for a special occasion that never came. It was a deep, blood-red sheath. Elegant and severe. I pulled it out. An hour later, I stood in front of the full-length mirror. My hair was styled. My makeup was flawless, a perfect, impenetrable mask designed to hide the raging storm in my eyes. The red dress fit me like a glove. A suit of armor. I looked at my reflection, and for the first time in years, I didn't see a woman desperate for approval. I saw someone else. A stranger forged in the fires of betrayal. A woman who was walking into a battle she had no intention of losing. I took a slow, deep breath, my hand resting for a fleeting, protective moment over my flat stomach. Then, I turned and walked out the door, driving toward my destiny, toward the reckoning that awaited them all. The drive to my in-laws' house was surreal. The familiar suburban streets, lined with perfectly manicured lawns and cheerful, sun-drenched houses, seemed like a set from a movie about a life that was no longer mine. I felt strangely calm, encased in a bubble of cold, quiet resolve. The grief and rage were still there, but they were no longer a chaotic storm. They were a focused, contained energy source, fueling my every move. I was a soldier marching toward a battle that had already been decided. They just didn't know who the victor was yet. I pulled into their sweeping circular driveway and parked my car behind a row of luxury sedans and SUVs. Taking one last, deep breath, I got out of the car. The click of my heels on the pavement was the only sound in my silent world. I walked up the stone pathway to the heavy oak door and, without hesitation, I rang the bell. The door was opened by Karen, her face a perfect portrait of feigned relief. She was dressed in a pale yellow cashmere sweater set, the picture of gracious hospitality. Nicole, oh, thank goodness. We were so worried when you disappeared last night. She enveloped me in a hug that felt like being wrapped in a silken spider's web. Her expensive perfume cloying and sweet. I just needed some air, I said, my voice even and cool as I gently detached myself from her embrace. I stepped into the house. It was brighter than the night before. The formal rooms now flooded with midday sunlight. A catered brunch was in full swing. About 20 guests. The inner circle of my in-laws' social and business world were scattered around the living room and back patio. Sipping mimosas and nibbling on miniature quiches, the air hummed with polite, meaningless chatter. Michael was across the room, talking to a man I recognized as his father's lawyer. He saw me. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second before he flinched and looked away. His guilt a visible, shimmering aura around him. And then I saw her. Brittany. She was standing near the grand fireplace, right next to Robert, who had a proprietary hand on the small of her back. She was wearing a tasteful white sundress, looking fresh-faced and innocent. She smiled demurely as Robert introduced her to a wealthy-looking couple. She looked completely at home, as if she were already the lady of the manor. I felt a strange detachment looking at her. The sharp, piercing jealousy I might have expected simply wasn't there. She wasn't the cause of this. She was just a symptom of a deeper disease. She was a tool, and I was here to confront the craftsman. For the next hour, I played the part of the dutiful daughter-in-law. I moved through the rooms, a faint, fixed smile on my lips. I accepted a glass of orange juice. I exchanged pleasantries with people who looked at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. I was a ghost at my own funeral, and the performance was draining the last of my emotional reserves. Finally, after the guests had finished eating, Robert moved to the center of the room and tapped a fork against his champagne flute. The sound, sharp and clear, sliced through the conversations, bringing the room to an immediate, expectant silence. He beamed at his audience, a benevolent king surveying his court. Friends, colleagues, he began, his voice resonant with false sincerity. Thank you all for being here. Family, as we all know, is the most important institution. It is the bedrock of our society, the carrier of our legacy, and sometimes, to ensure the strength and future of that family, difficult decisions must be made. One must be willing to prune the branches of a tree so that the trunk can grow stronger and bear fruit for generations to come. His gaze swept the room and then, like a predator locking onto its prey, it settled on me. The air in the room grew thick and heavy. The polite smiles on the guests' faces began to falter. Nicole, he said, his voice taking on a tone of deep, paternal disappointment. We welcomed you into this family 2 years ago. We had hopes. We had expectations. A marriage, like a business, is an investment. We expect a return. He let the cruel words hang in the air. And after 2 years, it has become painfully clear that you have failed to provide the most fundamental return a wife can offer. You have failed to give this family an heir. A collective, horrified gasp rippled through the guests. I could feel every eye in the room on me, burning into my skin. I did not flinch. I did not look away. I held his cold, triumphant gaze. So, he continued, a cruel smile playing on his lips. In light of this failure, we have decided to give you one final anniversary gift. He gestured to his lawyer, who stepped forward holding a beautiful, silver-wrapped gift box. Robert took the box and held it out to me. A gift to mark the end of this chapter, and the beginning of a new one for our family. My hands were steady as I took the box from him. I untied the silk ribbon with deliberate, unhurried movements. I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of white tissue paper, it were a sheaf of legal documents and a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen. Divorce papers, already signed by Michael in his neat, precise script. Before the guests could fully process the sheer, theatrical cruelty of the moment, Robert spoke again, his voice booming with pride. And it is my distinct pleasure to announce the reason for our family's bright new future. He placed his hand on Brittany's shoulder, drawing her forward. Michael and this wonderful young woman, Brittany, have found a profound connection. We look forward to welcoming her into our family officially, as his future fiancée. Brittany blushed and gave a small, rehearsed smile. Every head in the room swiveled from me to Michael. He stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the Persian rug beneath his feet. He wouldn't look at me. He couldn't. In that moment, I searched his face for any flicker of the man I had loved, any hint of remorse, any shred of the person who had promised to protect me. There was nothing, just a hollowed-out coward. A puppet whose strings were held by the monster he called a father. And in that empty space, the last vestiges of my love for him died a quiet, final death. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. Everyone was waiting for me to break, to cry, to scream, to plead. I did none of those things. I calmly placed the lid back on the box. Then, I picked up the fountain pen. I clicked it open. With everyone watching, my movements smooth and measured, I spread the signature page on top of the box and signed my name. The scratch of the pen on the thick paper was the only sound. Nicole C. Miller. A firm, clear signature. An ending. An abdication. I placed the pen back in the box and looked up. My eyes meeting Robert's. His triumphant smile wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. This was not the reaction he had scripted. He had wanted a scene. A messy, emotional breakdown that would justify his actions. I had denied him his climax. Just as a confused murmur began to build in the room, the doorbell chimed. Clear and bright. A moment later, the maid opened the door, and Jessica walked in. She was wearing a sharp, black pantsuit, her expression calm and businesslike. She surveyed the tense, silent room, her eyes finding mine for a brief, supportive moment before landing on Robert. She walked directly toward him, her heels clicking with purpose on the hardwood floor. She stopped in front of him, ignoring the stunned faces of the guests. I believe you forgot one last gift, she said, her voice cool and steady, cutting through the thick atmosphere. She reached into her leather portfolio and pulled out a crisp, white business envelope. She didn't hand it to him. She placed it, with deliberate precision, on the coffee table directly in front of where he stood. This is from Nicole, she stated clearly. I believe you, as the head of the family, should be the first to see it. Robert stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. A sneer curled his lip. He clearly thought it was some pathetic, pleading letter from me. With a flourish of arrogance, he snatched it up and ripped it open. He pulled out the single sheet of paper from inside, and he began to read. The transformation was mesmerizing. The smug, condescending sneer on his face faltered. It dissolved into a mask of pure confusion. His eyebrows furrowed. His eyes scanned the page again. Faster this time. The ruddy, confident color drained from his face, leaving behind a sick, pasty gray. His jaw went slack. The hand holding the paper began to tremble, the sheet rattling with a sound like dry, dead leaves. He looked up from the page, his eyes wide with a dawning, abject horror, and stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. The entire room was frozen, a tableau of shock and confusion. Karen, sensing that the script had gone terribly, horribly wrong, took a hesitant step toward her husband. Robert, what is it? She asked, her voice a nervous quaver. What does it say? He couldn't speak. He could only stare at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. In the deafening silence, I slowly, deliberately, rose to my feet. Every eye in the room, which had been fixed on the broken figure of Robert, now snapped to me. I looked directly at my father-in-law, at the man who had just publicly tried to destroy me, and I held his terrified gaze. The power in the room had shifted, and it was finally mine. My voice, when it came, did not tremble. It was not loud, but it sliced through the suffocating silence of the room with the clean, cold precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Every eye was on me. Every breath was held. I looked directly at Robert, at the crumbling ruin of the tyrant who, just moments before, had been so sure of his absolute power. That paper, I said, my voice resonating with a calm I hadn't known, I possessed, is a copy of my blood test results from the clinic yesterday. I let that statement settle, letting the guests process the non sequitur. I saw Michael take an involuntary step forward, his brow furrowed in confusion. I saw Karen's hand flutter to her throat, I let my gaze sweep over them all before it returned. With deliberate and final judgment. To Robert. I'm 8 weeks pregnant. The words detonated in the silent room. A collective, audible gasp was followed by a chaotic explosion of whispers. It was a sound like fire consuming dry leaves. I saw faces turn from me to Michael. Then to Robert. Their expressions a mixture of shock, horror, and a dawning, delicious understanding of the drama unfolding before them. But I wasn't finished. I took a single step forward. A predatory grace in the movement. Congratulations, Robert, I said, my voice laced with a sweet venez-moi poison. You just publicly disowned and humiliated the mother of your first and only grandchild. The room erupted. It was no longer a party. It was the scene of a spectacular public detonation of a family's legacy. Michael, his face ashen, stumbled toward me, his hands outstretched in a pleading, pathetic gesture. Nicole, is it true? He stammered, his voice cracking. Pregnant, why? Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him, at the man who had stood by silently while his father publicly branded me a failure. I felt nothing. No pity. No lingering affection. Just a vast, cold emptiness, where my love for him used to be. Tell you, I asked? My voice dripping with an icy contempt I didn't know I was capable of. Tell you, Michael, so you could run to your father and the two of you could strategize, so your lawyer could draw up papers to claim my child while you discard me, so you could try to take my baby. The one thing you both seem to value, while you push me out the door, no. Thank you. I think I'll handle this on my own. He recoiled as if I had physically struck him. From across the room, Karen let out a strangled cry. Pregnant, that's not possible, she's lying, she shrieked. Her eyes wild with panic. Robert. Do something. Make her take it back. Robert did nothing. He stood rooted to the spot, the damning paper still clutched in his trembling hand. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire life's work, his precious dynasty, burned to the ground in a single, irreversible moment. His face was a mask of utter, abject ruin. And Brittany, the poor, foolish girl who thought she was the star of this play, was now just collateral damage. Her face had gone from pale to a ghostly white. Her eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, for a way to melt into the expensive wallpaper. She was a pawn in a game she had just spectacularly lost. And the humiliation radiating from her was a palpable thing. She slowly began to back away, trying to disappear into the horrified crowd. I turned my attention back to the shattered couple who had orchestrated my downfall. Enjoy your legacy, I said. The words a final, dismissive curse. I looked at the gift box on the table, the one containing my signed agreement to end my marriage. I felt a profound sense of release. It wasn't a surrender, it was a declaration of independence. I turned to Jessica, who had been standing by the door, a silent, powerful sentinel. I gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was time to go. Let's get out of here, I whispered. As we walked toward the door, the crowd of guests parted for us as if we were royalty, their faces a gallery of awe and pity. No one spoke. No one tried to stop us. Michael made a weak, choked sound behind me, but he did not follow. As my hand touched the cool brass of the doorknob, I paused and looked back one last time. I saw Robert finally collapse into a chair, his head in his hands. I saw Karen rushing to his side, her social ruin complete. I saw Michael standing alone in the middle of the room, a ghost in the wreckage of his own life. Then, I opened the door and walked out into the bright, clean sunlight. I did not look back again. A few months later, the scent of fresh paint and lavender filled my small, sunny apartment. It was a space that was entirely my own, paid for with my own money from my job as a graphic designer. A career I'd put on hold to be a perfect wife. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The walls of the spare bedroom, which was slowly transforming into a nursery, were the color of a soft, buttery yellow. My mother was on a stepladder, carefully cutting in the paint around the ceiling, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jessica was on the floor, expertly assembling a crib, a stray smudge of yellow paint on her cheek. Laughter, easy and genuine, echoed in the small space. "Are you sure you don't want to know if it's a boy or a girl?" my mother asked for the 10th time, a playful twinkle in her eye. "I'm sure," I said, smiling as I sat in a comfortable rocking chair, a cool glass of lemonade in my hand. The only surprise I want for the next 18 years is a good one. We worked all afternoon. The easy camaraderie, a soothing balm on the still tender scars of my recent past. This was family, not the cold, transactional institution Robert was so obsessed with. But this small, fierce circle of women who had wrapped themselves around me, who had held me up when I thought I would fall. This was a family built on love, not on obligation or bloodlines. I never heard from Robert or Karen directly again, but I heard the stories through the city's relentless gossip mill. The anniversary brunch became the stuff of legend, a spectacular implosion that was recounted with hushed glee at every subsequent social gathering. Robert's business took a significant hit as several of his most important partners, disgusted by his public display of cruelty, quietly pulled their investments. Their reputation, which they had so meticulously curated, was in tatters. They became social pariahs, the villains in a story everyone loved to tell. Brittany, I heard. I had left her job and moved out of state within a week of the party, vanishing as quickly as she had appeared. Michael tried. In the first few weeks, my phone was bombarded with his calls and texts. A desperate stream of apologies, excuses, and pleas. I was a fool. I was weak. I love you, Nicole. Please. Let's talk about our baby. I never responded. After a month of silence from me, the messages turned to frantic, angry demands sent through his lawyer about his parental rights. My own lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Jessica had recommended, handled it all. I blocked his number and let the legal process create a wall around me that he could never breach. The day my son was born was quiet and peaceful. It was just me, my mom, and Jessica in the hospital room. When the nurse placed him in my arms, a tiny, perfect bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket, the world fell away. He had a full head of dark hair, and my eyes, I looked down at his small, trusting face, and a wave of love so powerful, so fiercely protective, washed over me, cleansing the last of the bitterness and pain from my soul. All the hurt, all the betrayal, it all just disappeared. It was insignificant in the face of this new, profound love. "What's his name?" my mom whispered, her eyes wet with happy tears. I looked at my son, my beautiful boy, my future. "Ethan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Ethan James Miller." I gave him my name. He was my legacy, not theirs. My beginning? Not their continuation. A year later, the sun was warm on my face as I sat on a blanket in the park. The air was filled with the sound of children's laughter and the distant melody of an ice cream truck. Ethan, now a sturdy, determined toddler, was taking wobbly steps across the grass, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated joy as he chased a bright yellow butterfly. I watched him, and my heart felt so full it might burst. He stumbled and fell onto the soft grass with a soft thump, looked up at me with wide, surprised eyes, and then let out a delighted giggle before pushing himself back up to continue his pursuit. In that moment, I realized the truth. My ultimate revenge wasn't the public humiliation of the family that had tried to break me. It wasn't their social ruin or their financial losses. My revenge was this peaceful, ordinary, beautiful moment. My revenge was the sound of my son's laughter. It was the calm in my heart, the strength I had found in myself, the beautiful, quiet life I had built from the ashes of the old one. They had been obsessed with their name, their bloodline, their legacy. They were willing to destroy a person to preserve it. But in their cruel, desperate grab for the future, they had lost the one thing that truly mattered. They wanted an heir to secure their name. Instead, I got a son who helped me reclaim mine. And I would spend the rest of my life making sure he grew up knowing he was loved for exactly who he was, not for what he could provide. That, I knew, was the sweetest victory of all.